Good evening. I call the regular meeting of the Ames Area Metropolitan Planning Organization Transportation Policy Committee to order for March 22nd. Good evening, committee members. Thank you for attending. We'll turn over the consent. Any comments that John you wish to make or Kyle wish to make on items 1, 2, or 3?
None for me, thank you.
Okay. Any questions for staff on items 1, 2, or 3? Hearing none, entertain a motion to approve consent, which includes all 3 items.
So moved.
Second.
By Supervisor, seconded by Jacob. All right. Those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed or abstaining? Motion carried. Thank you. Item 4, motion approving draft FY 2023 Transportation Planning Work Program. John?
Thank you, Chair. Kyle has a brief presentation to explain this year's draft work plan.
So the Transportation Planning Work Program, or abbreviated TPWP, is a federally required document that the MPO updates annually every spring. It identifies and budgets all of our transportation planning activities and document updates that the MPO undergoes for the upcoming fiscal year. This particular program covers fiscal year 2023, which begins July 1st this year. This year, the work program is broken into 7 main work elements, and I'll go through each of them here. So the first one is administration. So this would cover the development of the work program itself, public participation plan, Title VI documentation and compliance, updating our MPO website, professional development for staff, etc. Item 2 is transportation improvement program, or the TIP. So that's the annual development of all of our new TIPs and processing amendments for our current TIPs. Number 3 is transit planning, which is providing support to a lot of SIRIDE's transit planning activities, including completing their annual certifications, updating the passenger transportation plan, updating the transit asset management plan, conducting ridership and transit services studies, and for this year, developing SIRIDE's climate action plan. Number 4 is comprehensive planning. So that's support for transportation studies and projects such as speed and traffic studies, performing traffic modeling, support for the Ames Bike Ped Master Plan this year, which is an effort that should be starting up in these next few months. Support for the Ames Traffic Adaptive Network build out, which will also be happening later this year, and also support for the Ames Climate Action Plan. And number 5, long-range transportation planning. So ensuring regional planning efforts and projects conform to our Metropolitan Transportation Plan, utilizing our travel demand model for long-range forecasting and planning studies, and then not this year, but next year, this would be where we would put our update to our next Metropolitan Transportation Plan. And then number 6, transportation data. So this is procuring transportation data, so web-based platforms, data sensors, etc., data collection activities, and also any assessing and analyzing of our region-wide data sets for looking at multimodal mobility trends. And then last is special studies. And this year we have 2 corridor studies listed in here. The first one is for South Duff Avenue, starting at South 16th Street and then kind of going south through the US 30 interchange and ending at the Airport Road intersection. So about 4 intersections in that corridor study. And then the other one is the 190th Street corridor on the north side of Ames, spanning from GW Carver to US Highway 69. And that includes the intersection with Hyde Avenue. So 3 intersections as a part of that study. In total, the budget for the work program is $448,000. About $358,000 of that comes from our federal planning funds, and the rest would come from local match. Just short of $43,000 in unobligated funds in the budget, which would become future carryover. And then the last point I just wanted to make is public input session this Thursday for anyone who wants to join. Going to be held at noon on Microsoft Teams. And also public comments for the work program would be accepted all the way till April 30th. More information on both of those can be found on the MPO website. So.
Okay. Any questions for staff? All right. Entertain a motion approving the draft FY 2023 Transportation Planning Work Program and setting May 24th, 2022 as date of public hearing.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. Did you catch that, Council and SIRIDE? Those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carried. Thank you. All right, policy committee comments. Start with Jacob. Any comments tonight?
No comments.
Brahman,
None for me, thanks.
Rachel, Amber? Bill? None today. Gloria? Tim? Nita? All right, John. No, I wasn't, I know.
was just going to dovetail on Kyle's comments a little bit about the 190th Street corridor study. I think that's important, particularly since it looks like there's some federal money that's coming, and the sooner we can accelerate those 3 roundabouts, I think would be a good thing to do. And with this group involved in so many different ways between where those 3 roundabouts are, I think it's important. And I think they dovetail in really well with the Ames Climate Action Plan, particularly with the savings that goes with that and the gas savings. So I think there's a lot of good things there that all fit together and would be really helpful to continue to move forward on those. So, thank you.
Okay. Linda? Any comments?
I would just second what John said about what's going on with 190th and those 3 intersections. I think that we're seeing more and more with the growth in North Ames, the need to do something more with those intersections. Did see an article recently about the gas savings using roundabouts as opposed to traffic signals. And I think that should be considered, given the climate action plan has been mentioned here.
John, you want to comment on item 7B, the 190th corridor study as mentioned was made regarding roundabouts, and the point is that seems to be a foregone or implied foregone conclusion. Would you kind of just describe what process you're going through? And obviously a roundabout would be included in that, but can you just walk through that, please?
Sure. And maybe just clarify how the projects appear in the long range plan, and then how we move forward from that, from the MPO into the sponsor, the agency doing a project. So the current long range plan does identify those 3 locations: Carver and Cameron, Carver and 190th, and then 190th and Hyde as potential intersections for improvements. But it doesn't identify them in any particular treatment. So it's not identified at this point as a roundabout or as turn lanes and signals or anything specific. And all 3 are actually programmed in the long range plan in 3 different locations. So the Cameron and Carver intersection appears in the developer driven section. And then the Carver and 190th is in the illustrative section. So that's not in the fiscally constrained part of the plan. So that means the plan goes through 2045. So the fiscally constrained part means that looking at the typical funds that the jurisdictions within the MPO would have for transportation, that those illustrative projects would just fall outside of that typical funding between now and 2045. And then the third one, Hyde and 190th, that appears in the fiscal year 2025 through 2029 range. So the Carver and Cameron one being developer driven, that has been initiated with the annexation and then the forthcoming development on the southwest corner, the Dank Bar and Munch development, it's typically referred to as. So in looking at the traffic study, talking with the traffic engineers, talking with the county, the developer, the approach that we're taking at that intersection will be obtaining funding from the developers for signalization, and then the developers will do turn lanes. And then, as you mentioned, the corridor study, the 190th corridor study, that's probably the more immediate thing in the long range plan. So that'd be a corridor study from Carver easterly through Hyde. So that would take a look at what's going on in that corridor, look at the needs, the traffic needs that might be identified, and then what solutions we would have at the intersections and through the corridor to address those needs that are identified in the study. So as you know, we moved the study up. It appears both in the city of Ames CIP for fiscal year 22-23. So that would begin in July. And then as Kyle just identified in the draft work plan for the MPO, that's also in the state FY23, which begins July 1st. So until we go through that study, we really don't have any projects identified. But getting started on that study, moving forward, not only quickly but accurately through that study to identify what improvements might be needed, would then show what projects that would be identified. And I might note that those locations are shared jurisdiction. The Hyde and 190th is the legs of that intersection are shared between the city and the county. And then as of now, the Carver and 190th is entirely within the county.
We're sharing costs right now on 190th and Hyde, but the way it was annexed, the intersection is within city limits.
Well, yeah, and that as I mentioned, so we go through the study and we identify a project, and that'll have to be a negotiation between the agencies, the city of Ames and the Story County, for how we might move forward with funding and developing and carrying out that project.
Also comment on, John, in terms of in order to access federal funding or these potential grants that might be coming down, what's required in advance for that in order to draw that down, and what's been the historical criteria for accessing those money?
Sure. And thank you, Mayor Pop, for sending the emails. And we took a look at those and discussed them as staff. So thank you for that. They really would be looking for projects that have been identified. So not going through that corridor study yet and not having specific projects identified would be very difficult to put forward an application at this point and would likely score low. Another thing not in our favor of application at this point, on a federally competitive level, they'll be looking to mitigate major safety concerns that would be fatalities and major injuries, first and foremost. And then secondary to that would be major property damage. And fortunately, we haven't experienced those fatalities and major injuries at these intersections. So at this point, without those and without a specific project being identified, it'd be difficult to apply for funding right now until we go through that corridor study and we get something identified. Also, the state has a traffic safety program that you can apply annually for grants, and that may be a more likely avenue to obtain outside funding than through a federally competitive grant. So we'll certainly work with the state, and we work with the state on applying through that program every year. So we're used to putting together applications, and the state's typically been good partners with us on the projects that we apply for.
And I would say that having the temporary lights at 190th and Hyde has been a big improvement. I
Good.
hear a lot of people say, whereas they really think it's more appropriate for a roundabout, it has really increased safety there. It's just made it easier for people to get through that intersection without worrying about who's going to sideswipe them, basically.
Good.
You know,
Yep.
so, that's why the county participated in it. We agreed that we would help with the temporary because we felt like it was necessary for our constituents. So
Sure. Yeah, that's great.
We do appreciate the city.
Well, we agree. We greatly appreciate the partnership and you pushing for it, and we don't want to have adverse data to try and justify, accessing,
Exactly.
funds. And the point of the exercise here is to say is the roundabout will be taken in consideration. It will be evaluated as one of the options. And so in order to arrive at a funding model and criteria and going for a grant, we have to do step one. And I know that Damien told us that I think that study got moved up by quite a few years in response to the request from the, the MPO. And will the study be done yet this calendar year, or do you know if it will bleed into early next year?
Well, the funding will be appropriated beginning July 1, but with our DOT planning funds, being involved now. I believe we could get started with the RFP prior to that so that we're ready to hit the ground once July 1 rolls around. But does that sound?
Yeah, I think our plan was, start the process in June for the RFP and then selection sometime in July maybe and get started.
And one of our DOT partners is here. If I don't mean to put him on the spot, but would that be a typical process to start the RFP prior to the fiscal year?
Great question. I'm gonna have to check it on that.
Okay, but if we can, we certainly will. Yeah,
It was 67,000 for 3 intersections to be studied.
I believe that's right. Yeah, something around that neighborhood anyway.
John, Mayor Pop mentioned the climate action plan. What connection, if any, is there between what the MPO does and what is recommended to us in a climate action plan recommendation that we'll be getting from our consultants?
We could look at carbon impact of the different options, things like that, and that may also help us access grant funds. When we do that, another source is the ICAP. That's the congestion and mitigation funding that looks at things like that, not only efficiency, but also environmental improvements.
Thanks.
Thank you for bringing that to our attention. And I wasn't meaning to skip over you. I knew you had comments, so I wanted to go ahead and get to the end so you can have this discussion. So anything else you want to follow up with, Mayor?
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you. Linda, anything else you want to follow up with? All right. With that, I entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right. We are adjourned. Thank you all for coming.
They make me sit back there if I've been bad.
Well, then I can't take the
No,
job.
we
I-
need
it's-
it.
it's-
That's a
sometimes.
real option. That's a real possible.
Yeah, it works. Thanks for coming. Yeah, good to see you. Thanks for your work.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming.
You too. Did you bring some sun back with you? I think you.
Yeah,
But it faded fast. I know.
They love it.
You can keep on track.
I'm in, man.
Good, absolutely. Okay, you take care. Bye.
10 minutes, 10 minutes, 5 minutes. I like it.
You watching confirmation hearings?
I've been listening.
I got
it. Was hard today a little bit, so, yeah.
I think she's gonna do fine. She's a good candidate.
Conveniently, I don't have any questions. So many megs. I want to cancel all my
That-
subscriptions.
know, me too.
And then we can count that for the carbon impact.
Yeah. Hard,
What's that?
but I also don't
Yeah, they probably do.
Hopefully, they can do it.
Yeah. Is that something I have to do?
All right. Good evening. Call the regular city council meeting for March 22nd to order. Welcome, everybody. And we're going to move right into consent. And you'll note we're working from an amended agenda. There was one item added. The SCADA system for electric services is on the agenda. And staff has also asked that we pull item 13. We have not received a signed amendment to lease agreement with T-Mobile. So that is being pulled from consent. Does the council wish to pull any other item from consent tonight? Hearing none, entertain motion to approve consent.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All
Is
right.
that consent as amended?
I'm sorry. Thank you. Yeah, as amended.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. All right. Roll call.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. We'll go ahead and move on to public forum. This is a time we set aside for comments from the public on topics of city business other than those listed on the agenda. I ask people to limit their comments to 3 minutes or less, and I have one person who wants to address me thus far, and that is Richard.
At the last city council meeting, Susan Guasada was talking about the public satisfaction survey. And it's like, I know when I've had to fill that thing out before, I've often put on a comment that I think the police especially should be getting the door for people instead of me. And it seems kind of ironic that they don't let me get the door for people any longer. I saw in the Story County Sun, there was a reference made to a 45-page document that was approved by the city council meeting last November. It's like I didn't have any, I mean, I don't have a computer. I don't like a computer. They try to get them to behave like people. And I read this thing, and it sort of seems like the police talk about going to like National Night Out and donuts for things, and they don't get the door for people at City Hall. I know I've talked to several people on the police about it over the years. I know I've talked to city council members about it over the years. I think, you know, I mean, I don't get paid I mean, I've gone into city council, not only the city council meetings, it's like there was a meeting that they had for the bringing our values to life or something like that they had. It's like I tried to go to a city council, a meeting, and I was told by you guys, that, or not you guys, but I was told I couldn't go to an employee meeting because it was an employee meeting. Well, you guys are employees too. And it's like, have you ever been to an employee meeting? And it's like, do they throw you out? I mean, I can't even go to the concert at the city auditorium because it's not legitimate business, even though I paid to go to those things. And I don't know.
Anybody else wish to address council under public forum? All right, seeing none, we close public forum. Moving on to item 24, staff report regarding outside funding request process. Brian.
Thank you, Mayor. During the budget approval process this year, there was a discussion about a couple of requests for outside funding that did not go through our adopted program for reviewing and making recommendations regarding those requests. And so we have provided this report tonight to ask for the council to clarify the procedures in the future for when we have these requests. You recall that a number of years ago, before we had an adopted process, that requests for city funding from outside groups would come at all times of the year. And it was difficult to understand exactly what the grand total was of funding being requested. And so the council adopted this outside funding request process, and we've reviewed primarily the same set of organizations that have made requests over that period of time. But there have been from time to time some additional organizations that have made requests. So what's key in this report is the recommended process on page 2. So the intent of city staff would be that in July of each year, we would come to you to get clarification about any modifications that you would like to the program criteria, to provide you an opportunity to outline what it is you would like to see from outside organizations in terms of the services that you would like to solicit from them. Then it would be the intent that in October and November that we gather the applications from organizations that are applying for that funding and review them, but that no organization would be allowed to submit some sort of separate application to the city council and bypass that process. So that would provide us the opportunity to put all of those requests together. You would be able to look at them all at the same time. And we would differentiate between the one-time requests and requests for ongoing operational support, which have historically been sort of the two buckets that those types of requests have fallen into. Normally, we would compare the operational support to the prior year, so you get a sense of whether those requests are growing or shrinking or how they're changing. The one-time requests, we would ask that if you were to approve those, that you would identify a source of funding for them. So in some instances, it may make sense for that funding to come from local option sales tax. In some instances, it might make more sense for hotel motel or general fund savings or other sources of city funds. So ultimately, the key here is a commitment that if a request comes in outside this process, that it would not be eligible for funding. Now, ultimately, the council makes its own rules, so you could change that. But we would like to develop some consistency here out of fairness, not only to all the other organizations, but to you as council members to ensure that you can review these effectively. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Questions or comments?
So Brian, the identification of fund sources for these one-time requests would occur in conjunction with the February meeting?
Yeah, so at that time, we would take a look at what is the nature of the request and what's the total amount of requests and what's the condition of the budget and where would it make most sense to take those funds from if the city council wanted to approve it.
We should clarify also that during the budget process, we asked for input for the public about spending of the city budget. So this does not include someone coming forward and say, we want more money spent on snow removal or anything that's one of the services the city provides. This is talking about giving money to a third party, an outside agency.
Is it helpful to codify this in any form? Like, I know we could still decide to grant funding outside of this, but, you know, to say that we would like this drafted in sort of a protocol or policy format so that we can better broadcast to agencies that we are attempting to be serious about this parameter, maybe. Is that okay? I move that we do that.
Second.
Okay, discussion?
Excuse me, just to clarify, codify. what do
Well, I
do?
mean,
Pass a
make it
resolution?
into sort of make it into our understood
We have
protocol or
council
policy,
policies. Are you in the?
Well,
you know.
the most recent set of application and criteria documents you've approved for this program say that already.
Okay.
But if we could certainly beef that up on the application page to make sure that that is absolutely clear to folks.
Also, when we publicize the upcoming budget process and how it's going to work and the calendar, we can emphasize all that too.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, key would be perhaps the town budget meeting. That's where we tend to get a lot of the initial contact with individuals or groups that may want to see something specific come out of the budget.
But
we
we'll
can
know that
emphasize
also
it at
because sometimes people write directly to you or they write to us. They don't come to the town budget meeting asking for funding. Right then we could send the letter back out and inform them of the correct procedure.
Yes, something like that. Yeah.
So we'll know if you're standing behind us, we can say that now.
Yeah. Okay.
So there's a motion on the floor. Is it still in order or do you wish to
Well,
rescind
good
it?
question. If it's already
Well,
already
I think you
Part
can
of
pass or is a resolution or a motion accepting this process. We've laid out some timeframes in this one's a little bit different.
So I guess the question is, I heard codify and
I just-
and the question is it more or less just establish policy is what you're thinking about or?
yes. And you could bring it back if you want to draft it in some way. But if you think it's already ready, then
we could bring it back in July when we review
perfect.
the
So you want to
criteria.
withdraw the motion? You want to,
I think I can withdraw the motion
Okay.
and it's going to be okay.
all right. Any other questions, comments? Tim?
No, I agree with Brahman. I think it'd be helpful to have something that's consistent for future councils, and not that it can't change, but providing some guidance I think is good. So I like the idea of trying to create an accepted policy. So good work on this.
I think that couple of things. One is, the question is there, does staff envision a hard and fast deadline at which after a certain date, they would no longer accept any policies or any requests for the coming year, and what might that date be?
I believe our existing application process puts November 15th as the application deadline each year. And that can be challenging for some because we do have quite a bit of lead time in planning for the next budget cycle. But unfortunately, that's the amount of time that we need to be able to then review those requests, come up with recommendations, and get it worked into your February budget approval process.
So I guess the question for council is that acceptable? And if so, as it says in the staff comments, is it prepared to deny any requests that come in after that deadline? Otherwise, it's just basically undercutting having a policy put in place. Or should the deadline be extended a little longer, just so you can say, well, we tried to make it a little more palatable or not?
I mean, I think if you look at like grant programs, for example, I mean, many of them are done once a year and have very strict deadlines that are months and months in advance of when the funds are actually awarded.
Yep.
So, I mean, I don't think it's rare for this to happen and, not have a deadline of November 15th.
Okay. All right. Any other questions or comments? Do you want a motion just approving this process or just accepting as a staff report tonight, Steve?
You're not prepared to pass a motion accepting it? You're going to wait until we bring it back? Is that
No, we could, I would move that we accept this process.
Second?
policy?
Okay. All right. Any discussion? Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carried. Thank you. All right. Item 25, naming policy.
So the city council back in February during the budget approval process requested that staff prepare a naming policy for the naming of city facilities after significant individuals, events, etc. We have an existing policy for parks and recreational facilities and features. We also have a separate policy that relates to street naming, which is very specific to handle safety and 911 type concerns and so forth. So this policy would be separate from those two policies and borrows significantly from the Parks and Recreation policy. So we've tried to outline the different circumstances in which it might be appropriate to name a city facility after an individual or after something else. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have about this one too.
Questions?
I have a
Comments?
question that's
Anita.
probably just more about the language and helping me understand a little bit under 4, where it talks about best serves the interests of the city. Help me, can you give me like a definition, or what's the general intent of that language?
Not sure that I thought about that too significantly. It's the same
Okay.
language that was in the Parks and Rec.
Okay,
policy,
and
I
I'm
think, in
sorry, I
that
wasn't here
section.
for that discussion, so I'm
Um,
just asking.
I think ultimately, the key here is that the city council decides what is in the city's best interest. And so if the council believes that naming a place, a facility, or a feature is in the best interest, that's where the buck stops.
Okay,
So the council
up
is
to
the
the
one
council.
making that value judgment
Okay.
about whether it's worthwhile or not.
thank you.
Other questions? Right, I just had one quick comment, that is on 5E, other considerations. It says the last paragraph, City of Ames reserves a right to rename any facility, major feature. does that also include just removing a current name but not renaming it? Would that be also included in renaming? Because I'm thinking, like, for example, if I appreciate the way that fact is something comes to light that it warrants removing a person's name, maybe it doesn't get named.
Sure. Yeah, I think that makes sense. That it would cover that circumstance.
very good.
Simply remove the name.
All right. Any other comments, questions? If not, I would entertain a motion approving the proposed City of Ames naming policy.
So moved?
Second.
Okay, any discussion? Those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carried. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Brian. All right, item 26. Annex initiation for 2219 and 2121 State Avenue.
Good evening, City Council. So tonight we're asking to initiate an annexation. It includes two properties owned by Iowa State University. The impetus behind this is an effort to extend sanitary sewer service to the north up essentially the State Avenue corridor to serve the Curtis Farm and the feed mill that's under construction at this time. So in discussion with staff about extending sewer, they've been working with Public Works about how to do that. And we've pointed out that the city policy is really to provide sewer to development that's within the city. So they've agreed to voluntarily annex the Curtis Farm in. Land to the north is already in the city. So while looking at this annexation that came in, staff did note that we have on file 2 covenants from neighboring properties. So in a way, it's unrelated. The reason that we have these covenants is they have water service with the city. And at the time, it wasn't deemed feasible to annex them. Upon annexation of the Curtis Farm, it would remove any impediments if City Council wants to move ahead with having these 2 other properties along State Avenue annexed to the city. So our recommendation is alternative 2, to which is sequentially annex the Iowa State property and then provide notice to the abutting property owners that we are interested in executing that covenant due to the fact that they've already received water service from the city. It will be the first time that I'm aware of that we've executed one of these water covenants. So we have a few dozen, I think, on at least a couple dozen on file. From the past 20 years, this will be the first time we've been able or desired to do that. So if we do that, we'll be reaching out to them. You would have to come back and go through hearing processes to annex those 2 properties. It isn't in the city because they signed the covenant. It's just a covenant that they will go through the process to be annexed. So any questions about the proposal or the alternatives?
All right, I'll open up public input. Does anyone who wants to address council on this topic tonight? We will close public input. Entertain a motion.
Move alternative 2.
Second.
Thank you. Those in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carried. Thank you. All right, I know item number 27, Dayton Avenue Tax Increment Financing Development Agreement.
So tonight we're reporting back to you on our RFP process to create for economic development purposes to support a small lot industrial subdivision. As we outlined in the report last fall, we set down this path we researched that there was not a lot of lots in the 1 to 3 acre range, really less than 10 acres. There was not a lot of industrial land that was available. So City Council did direct staff to prepare an RFP with some parameters in that would have assumed that a development is providing at least 6 small industrial lots. There were some other parameters about including the construction of speculative buildings. So not only would you subdivide land, but a developer would agree to build speculative buildings in an effort to create more available space for someone to move into more quickly. And hopefully that would attract more business into some of our industrial parks. As part of that, we were assuming there would be some financial incentive related tax increment financing to help with the development of the infrastructure in the subdivisions. In the RFP, we outlined some interest that we had as the city to think about it as a total package of what we were interested in for kind of the type of projects we would want and possibly the duration or length or value of the TIF that would go into that. And we allowed for a developer to either propose a developer rebate or for the city to take on the construction of infrastructure as we have in other other industrial projects. And then we would use TIF increment to reimburse ourselves for the construction of infrastructure. So after we did the RFP, we got one proposal, and in January, we brought that back to you and said we had one proposal. We thought it was worth negotiating further on. It was a little different than what we had asked for in the RFP. So after probably about 8 more weeks of discussion between us and Mr. Winkleblack, last week we reached an agreement on the principal deal elements that we thought we could bring forward to City Council to move forward on an actual agreement. So tonight we're discussing the terms. With council direction under alternative 1, we would then prepare a final agreement to be signed by the property owner and by the city, and that would then set in motion the development of the proposed subdivision. So in this development, some of the things that we're really focused on are really listed out here as the developer obligations and the city obligations. So we would expect the developer under this arrangement to develop 7 lots that are under 5 acres. There's also be 6 other lots that are over 5 acres, so a total of 13 lots on North Dayton Avenue across from the USDA Disease Lab out north. We do have the commitment for the speculative building to be constructed. There would be one that is completed within the first year, and then there'd be an 18-month allowance for the next one to be built, and that would be successive. So each time a building is no longer speculative, the developer would be obligated to then construct another building within 18 months, as long as there are still small lots available. So if the developer doesn't possess the land, they don't have to build buildings. But if they control the land still, then they do have to build the speculative buildings. So we had this experience in the Ames Community Development Park in the South Bell area. Similar model in terms of what we were expecting for small lots and building construction. Some of those things didn't work out well in the last 10 years about administering that contract and development agreement. We've been here a few times to talk about different elements. So staff took a little different take on this. We have, instead of looking for monetized securities, we just have penalties built in to kind of be a payment in lieu of reaching those development goals. So rather than having mortgages and securities posted for development of things, you'll see the terms here are a little bit different about how we would go about securing penalties for non-performance. We do have some restrictions on uses. There would be some future covenants that go along with this to talk about some elements of the design. We put in the RFP originally that this was to be for high employment jobs, essentially. We put in our uses that we didn't want warehouses, mini storage, salvage, or other storage uses, which I would call low employee intensive uses. The developer asked for warehousing to be included. Staff did eventually agree that adding that use is really consistent with general industrial nature of uses, and it could fit well within the proposal that they had. So the restricted uses are really storage-based uses that staff doesn't believe really fits an economic development goal of the city. Storage uses don't have a lot of activity or secondary economic impact in the community. So we're really looking at uses that are either in a true industrial use or an employment-based use that fit into this. So GI zoning allows for a very broad range of uses. It's not just industrial, it can be office uses as well. So it's a pretty broad range of uses that could go into this, the way this development agreement is written. So some of the other terms really relate to how the TIF would be created, or the value that would generate the TIF. So when I said a TIF rebate, that means that the developer would have the ability for the city to repay the developer over time based on the increased valuation of property tax out in this development. So as it develops, increased property tax create an increment that the city would then put forth or put back to the developer as a rebate, essentially, for developing the project. If the value is not created, the rebate is not paid. So it's considered a pay as you go. The city is not paying them out of our pocket. It's only based on the valuation of the project as it progresses over time to do this. So what we have agreed upon at this point in the project is to think of the infrastructure improvements for the development to be capped at $2.6 million to do water, sewer, and road improvements, including turn lanes on Dayton. We looked at this from our idea in the TIF was we had some comfort level following our past practices of thinking of a 10-year return on investment. It's kind of a general approach that we have when we start to approach incentives and negotiations. And that's how the RFP was written, to look at potentially a 10-year TIF. So as we worked through this with the developer, they were looking for potentially 10 years of payment We've put in a timeline of through 2035 to give some cushion of when the TIF would start to generate versus when payments would get received and then reimbursed back to the developer. Within that, the $2.6 million, if you reach $2.6 million before 2035, that's the end of the obligation. If you get to 2035 and the valuations haven't produced 2.6 million, once the TIF stops, it is no longer there to make reimbursement payments to the developer after 2035. So one thing to note is, as we discuss this public infrastructure cost, you're well aware from our own projects, there's some uncertainty in the market about what construction costs are at this point in time and materials. So as we approach this, there was a good conversation about what contingency should be for this. So we reached the $2.6 million as a cap, with the developer willing to provide verification to staff of actual costs. So if they do benefit from lower pricing this summer than maybe anticipated, the city may pay less for the project going forward. If, on the other hand, the expenses are greater than 2.6 million, the developer would have to come back to the city council and request that the council increase that cap. So the agreement would set a hard cap at 2.6, and the developer have to verify costs up to that. If anything comes in at more than that, the developer may choose to ask for an amendment to the agreement. It'd be up to the city council to decide if they want to make such an amendment in the future. One other key part about TIF that's in here as one of the bullets is an appropriations clause. So we have not frequently done developer rebates. The most recent is a Kingland project in Campustown, slightly different project, but the same financial instrument was being used. Under the advice of our bond attorney at the time we did that agreement, they gave us the advice that if you put a clause into the TIF agreement where it's appropriated annually, then it would not count against our city debt limit. So you still have an agreement that says you're going to make these payments based on the receipts that you have from the TIF, but it's truly subject to council appropriation. So during the Kingland agreement, every year Dwayne would come, the finance director would come before you, and you'd make some findings about TIF, and one of those actions would be to make that TIF payment to the developer. So if staff recommends having that appropriation clause, because it gives us more flexibility in how our debt limit is viewed. It doesn't change the financial obligation of the developer, but it does require a council to make that decision each year consistent with the agreement to appropriate that money back out to the developer.
So can I ask a question here, John? So this is something I want to make sure I understand. So can you think of a situation where a council would not approve this outlay?
I don't know why they wouldn't. It's a discretionary choice of the council on an annual basis to do that. That's why it wouldn't count as debt, because it's not a bound obligation. You have an agreement that structures how you would give that rebate back to somebody, and that's what you're being asked to follow through on. But your hands are not tied. That's why it wouldn't be considered a debt.
This just seems like a semantics exercise. On the one hand, the city has entered into agreement to make these payments, but yet we don't have an agreement to make the payments.
You're not obligated to make the payment.
It looks better financially. Is that what you mean? Like it looks better?
Well, what if
to
I had
not
a-
have it be debt?
What if I had debt to Wells Fargo for my house, and it looks better if I don't actually have a debt to Wells Fargo, but they certainly want me to make my mortgage payments. And the reason I bring this up is the developer is going to have to develop a pro forma. They're going to anticipate certain financials to run through. I'm having difficulty understanding the uncertainty that we're inserting into this. Can you help me understand that? And maybe I'm overthinking this. If I am, you can tell me.
But Steve can talk about the debt limit part, but the wording is to make it, yes, you have an agreement that says this is what the city intends to do, but on an annual basis, you have to follow through. If the council does not choose to do that, the developer has no recourse against the city council or the city for not making that appropriation in that year if it doesn't happen. So the developer would have to choose how to go forward with this agreement, that they trust that the city council will follow through on the agreement and make those appropriations on an annual basis.
But again, not to beat this horse, we're going to expect certain things of the developer. And maybe the developer says, I don't want to do this. So this seems very unilateral to me. And what am I missing?
Did you say we did this with Kingland too?
So the Kingland agreement is the first time that we
also did a Barilla. We did that in Barilla.
Okay.
Okay.
And I had the finance director go back and check, because this is a recommendation came from our bond advisor when we put this together.
Right.
And about 10 years ago, we looked at Dubuque and I've looked at Ankeny. Most cities didn't put it in there, but most recently, the Tiff rebate projects, the most recent, say 3 years or so, the majority of people are including it in their contracts.
Because it makes us more favorably rated.
Well, hopefully the people who are reviewing these bonds aren't watching our city council meeting tonight, so they don't know what we're doing. I mean, I suppose if the developer doesn't have any concerns, I don't have a concern, but
Well, I'm
You just-
sure the developer would have concern, but we didn't have it with the other two. But again, we'll be talking about a rebate on Lincoln Way project, and it's advisable to put the non-appropriation clause there too.
okay, well, I'm looking forward to hearing from the developer on that point. Thanks.
So I'm going to conclude just kind of about these terms. So when staff looked at this, based on the developer's projections of sale of land and some prospects that they think they have in the first 2 years of the project, staff was comfortable with the 2.6 million and the timelines we put forward based on their estimates that it would pay back that $2.6 million within 10 years. Now there's assumptions behind that. There's more than 3 buildings having to be built out here for that to work. But that's where staff was able to come to support the amount of money and the duration of the TIF allowance that we're recommending. There are some minimum valuation elements into this as well. Those partially help make sure that there's a payback in the TIF. There's also partially built around, we don't want land to be held for speculative purposes. This is an economic development project. We want to see land developed. We want to see jobs created, and we want to see things happen. That's why I think we're interested in supporting this project. It's not a buy and hold situation ideally. So there are some minimum valuations here to help support the TIF over time and to see efficient use of land as well. At the end of the report, there is to help give you some context to other agreements we've done, because you don't see these very often. So we put together the Ames Community Development 4th edition version and then the Kingland version, so you could have some context to what some of this terminology means. If you have any questions about that, I'd be happy to answer those at this time.
Question? I'm just trying to, as I'm inclined to do, trying to run some figures here. The amount that is rebated through TIF is just the base rate. It doesn't include the
Debt service.
Debt service and all the other things, right?
No, just debt service. It excludes debt service.
Yeah.
Excludes debt service.
So all taxing entities' debt service is excluded. So then it's just the general levies. I think what we put in, and it varies year to year, so you have to make an assumption there as well. I think we put in 2150 as the levy rate to model the increment that would be generated.
So 2150 is what they would.
That's what I think I put in my spreadsheet. I can look that up here.
So what would be I was just taking the $2.6 million, dividing it by 10 years. That's $260,000 of additional.
I'm sorry,
tax.
I put 2240 in as
How much?
the
Sorry.
$22.40
Okay.
was the
All right.
TIF rate in my spreadsheet.
So they'd have to essentially have about $10 to $12 million of additional valuation over a 10-year period of time, if nothing else was added. I'm just trying to, does that make sense? I'm just trying to
I'm not
figure out
quite
how, I mean, in a 10-year period of time, I'm trying to make it simple. Divide 2.6 million by 10, that'd be $260,000 a year. So if you take
So
that.
you need, so $260,000 of increment would need a valuation of at least $12.7 million. It just happens to match a line that's in my spreadsheet. That's why.
You're good.
So about $12.7 million of valuation has to be there to generate about 260 a year.
Well, just looking at the speculative buildings minimum shell valuation of $500,000, you know, it's going to take time to ramp it up.
So,
I was
the spec
just-
buildings won't pay this off.
Yeah.
This is going to really require the larger lots to have some improvements and to have higher value improvements. The spec buildings alone, what we saw in Ames Community Development Park, when they got finished out, their valuations are in maybe the 1.3 So that's obviously nowhere near what you need to be. Building those lots out alone will not pay back the TIF. It's going to require other development to happen.
Sure. Okay.
So I can understand the concern of developer, because we flipped this and then they're taking the risk.
Right.
We didn't demand that. The other way is go back to the more traditional way, but then we take the risk. So we're concerned protecting our citizens. So normally what we do, if we put in all the infrastructure, we make sure we don't enter disagreement until we at least have one entity there with a minimum evaluation, a substantial amount that helps us calculate it. So that's another option. If we can assume all the risk, we may have to wait until we have somebody in hand that allow us some security for your taxpayers. Just like I can understand their concern because they're not used to flipping the risk. But I don't think in that kind of development, you should just speculate on either. That's why we usually, there was a research park when we had a major project in hand is the first one. I can calculate that. And conservatively, we can estimate how long the payback's going to be. It might cause a little bit delay, but if the developer knew that we were committed to go ahead, if they had a bird in hand, we could calculate that. Maybe if they had two, that maybe get $10 million right away with two projects. The other thing you can do is split this project up, let the project go ahead. If it's too expensive, the developer maybe can move ahead now with their more traditional type of, or whatever they want to do with lots. And then we can, and it's a second phase, move into maybe doing the small lots, which would be less infrastructure costs. But flipping it back is more the traditional way. But going back to the traditional way, I think we need a project in hand, a substantial project in hand. It's not that, the spec buildings were more to make sure we not only had the infrastructure in place, but when someone came in town, we could say, we have a building. You don't have to wait a year now to put a building in. That's what we've tried to accomplish with this too. And we've been very successful in that and in our other TIF projects where we had at least one big project in hand with a minimum assessment value. And then the obligation, the risk shifts back to the city. But we want to be just as smart as developers. We want to make sure we're protected too by having a project in hand. I don't want you to think we force the shift in this, making the developer assume the risk.
And I don't think so. We left that option open in the RFP. I think there's different terms if it's a city project, because as Steve said, we have different interests we want to protect. If it's a rebate, we're hoping that's incenting the developer to move as quickly as possible through the project to generate that increment and do things like it's just a different perspective.
That's why we agree to some things when they assume the risk, like to also add the industrial tax abatement. If we were assuming a risk, we probably wouldn't do that. Some of the things we've added, we wouldn't put in. We'd be more traditional in our model. But we did agree to some things we wouldn't normally do because they assume the risk.
Table that's on, what is that? Top of page 4 there. Where it has the issue, the developer's position and the city position. So moving forward with what you've presented tonight, that lands us in which column on those issues?
It's in the middle. So we're trying to capture that where the RFP was and what we got for a proposal and where we are today. It's been an evolution.
Okay.
So we're not married to the hard terms of the RFP. We think this is a reasonable change between what the developers proposed and what the RFP was asking for.
Okay.
So that table really isn't the focus of this because the deal isn't really either of those.
I see.
It's a little different than their proposal and it's a bit different than the RFP.
Sure. I didn't know if those were issues that were still outstanding. I see.
Well, we were prepared, and maybe it's our fault, that on the addendum, on the column marked Dayton Avenue Industrial, and that was some compromises we made and we thought the developer made, but I don't believe we have a meeting of the minds right now. We thought we did, or I thought we did, because we made some movement there. But again, maybe the best course is to go back to our traditional model if you want to assume the risk under our terms. And let's get a project in hand that'll sign a minimum assessment agreement, and it'll hopefully just be as successful as the other projects we have.
So on the Ames community, this is on the addendum, the Ames Community Development Park, 4th edition. When did that start in 2009? Is that the way that chart reads? Is that correct?
Yeah, the agreement was signed in 2009. I'm not exactly sure when the infrastructure was installed. It would have been after 2009. I don't know if it was done immediately.
And we just kept adding to that. We didn't go out for competitive bids, so I don't think we had for those later stages, we didn't have another project at hand because we had continued to develop the area. It's when we initially started the project to get us going, to get a TIF increment in place.
Well,
And then we kept adding to it. We never went out with any competition, or we never didn't have a project at hand for those. But for the research park, we did with some of the projects there.
I was just trying to tease out was so there's 13 years, that was 13 years ago. And it was already an established corridor, right? It was 4th edition, so there was already buildings already there. Is that correct?
To the north, Bell Avenue just died into a 40-acre vacant lot. It wasn't connected all the way through. So what we did was we connected Bell from the north to the south,
Oh,
and
got
added
it.
the two cul-de-sacs that are out there also.
Okay. But it just says that the cap has not been up to $1 cap, which has not been reached in 13 years.
Yes, so we have not fully paid back our $875,000 investment yet. We're projected to within the next 2 to 3 years. So the last couple of years, there's been a lot more activity out there. So it's going to take a while to get that on the tax rolls, and we will pay it off, like I said, next 2 to 3 years.
Can I have one just sort of big picture question for Kelly? We just don't do this very often. And for people who are watching, maybe just give us like a couple sentences. We wouldn't have to use TIF to do a development. In fact, many communities, they use TIF for the residential,
Right.
and we don't do that. And so if we didn't use TIF for development, then we're going to sort of let market forces do their thing. And so here we're saying is a way of incentivizing to make up that difference between what the market needs and what is available. We're going to incentivize development using TIF. Am I saying that correctly?
Yeah. So I think that's why we did the analysis kind of what the inventory was of industrial lots. So city council doesn't have to do anything. You can let the market respond to what users want. What we said was that it appears from what we understand in the market, no one's going to create an industrial subdivision with smaller sites. They're more likely to rely on larger sites taking advantage of existing infrastructure rather than deploying more infrastructure. So as long as we're going to value creating these smaller sites, that was the justification to think about using TIF in this case.
But I just want to make clear, you have a policy, even if you did nothing right now, we always in an industrial area offer the industrial tax abatement. It's a 5-year sliding incentive. So you incentivize any industrial project.
Citywide, right?
Citywide.
Yeah. So this is above and beyond that, or it's more of an incentive than just the general industrial tax abatement.
And Keeneland, just for clarification, that was really done because they presented us with the option that either they were going to do their development farther away from town, from the city. And so this was an opportunity for us to see that property develop. And I think it was a great project. It allowed.
It was the first project, and we wanted to redevelop campus town.
Mm-hmm.
And we had to jumpstart one project, and that was the first one we jumpstarted. And after that, we didn't offer the same incentive because it was a stimulus project. If it
Right.
was.
But that one also offered an opportunity for Iowa State students to have interns and jobs very close to campus. So there were a lot of pluses to that.
It
So
was definitely a catalyst project. It's more like the conversation about Lincoln Way and the link as a catalyst project is what
Right.
Kingland was. Yeah. And there was a bit of an analysis, like you said, comparing if they just built their project on a green field versus having to deal with urban development with a parking structure and everything that goes into building in campus town. That was part of that cost difference. So we were trying to cover the redevelopment and the extra cost of being in campus town. That was part of the equation to
But that's our
justify
same
that.
thought process on the Link project on Lincoln Way here in
Yep.
Kellogg.
Right.
As a catalyst project for your Lincoln Way corridor. That's why we're discussing potentially giving TIF for that.
I just want to take a second for people who don't necessarily live and breathe this stuff to understand the why behind what we're doing. Thanks.
And the $2.6 million TIF amount is basically being rebated to cover actual costs for development of the infrastructure. Is that correct?
Yes.
Certainly the infrastructure, but I think that the developer is concerned about the cost. So I think we haven't written this agreement yet, but the way I
Right.
see the agreement written is we'll put a number in there, but again, it's going to be adjusted based on we'll have to write this, the actual bills when they bid it out. So we acknowledge it could come in higher. We're not trying to lock it in, and when we have to have that in place, by the way, I don't think we wait till after they construct it because we'll have to have the urban renewal area in place. It's probably when they bid it out, when they're comfortable it's locked in, then that number could go up.
But
That was one,
only with council's
I know, but that's one of the things they were talking about, they were concerned about. So we can write it that way.
Or as you said, do the reverse.
Or do the verse, but I'm not prepared to recommend that until we can
Right.
work with the developer. Maybe
Right.
get a company in hand.
Right.
Just think if you got your first two companies. That,
The other issue
Minimum
with
investment.
flipping the model is it's not going to get done this year. If it becomes a city project and we have to design, bid, and do all of those things, it will not be started this summer.
Okay, any other questions? All right, open up public input.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Chuck Winkleblack, Hunziker Companies, 105 South 16th Street. First want to, Kelly and Steve and Justin's not here tonight, but we've been working on this weekly, it seems like, for, since January. And it quite honestly just did not, we talked about a lot of things, but through all this, but it never, we've not done one of these before. So with this kind of rebate. So it's scary for me. This project doesn't work without the rebate with what we've agreed to cap the land sales at. And although 8 or 10 years from now, Steve will still be here, I'll still be here, but some of you may not be. And it's scary to think that the council can just decide, we don't want to give the money back to Chuck this year or next year or the following year. And all of a sudden, we've developed $40 to $60 million worth of property that pays taxes that we had an agreement to that we were going to get that money back. And a subsequent council says, we're not going to appropriate the money this year, and we're going to put a cap on it that says by 2035, it's done, and you can't get any back after 2035. So I just didn't understand it till today. It wasn't that it was trying to spring this, or we thought when Kelly and I quit talking we were talking, emailing, whatever we were doing, we were in agreement. So I'm not trying to raise this red flag at the last minute. What I've done different tax urban revitalization things, and it was like what we did out on West Lincoln Way. We have to set up the zone, council approves it, then they have to come the first time and they set up the abatement. They have to prove that. And then every year you approve it as it comes in front of you. But I don't think that with those abatement things that you have the ability to pull it back after we agree on it. I don't know, but that was my assumption, that we have set a schedule. It goes for 10 years. It slides back down and you have to approve the number every year, but it is there and it's approved. So
the difference is a rebate, you're actually you're making an expenditure, you're obligating your expenditure. Rebate is foregoing, abatement is foregoing revenue. So by state law, that becomes a debt, where the abatement is not a debt. That's the distinction.
Sure. And again, this is just a question, but it seems to me that you're only rebating money that you collect.
But I'm talking about state law.
I know. But I'm just saying that you're not obligated to pay us anything if we don't produce anything. So we're asking for a portion of the tax that's been generated to come back. So the only way it's in a debt is if you have income to offset it.
It is a debt. I'm not going to argue with you.
I'm not trying to argue. I'm just saying that the only way that it can be a debt to you, that you're obligated to pay us one penny, is if you have revenue in that you have to give back to us. I mean, is that not?
Well, can I ask a question?
Yeah, yeah, go ahead.
Well, one would be, is it any comfort or change your concern at all to know that other projects have had that same element, and to hear that maybe it's increasingly frequent in communities? So like to know that it might be something you have to regularly deal with for a TIF of that type anyway. So that's one of my questions, is like, is that comforting at all? And probably no, but and then the other one is more of just my thought about why a council would maybe not grant TIF would be not if you didn't build anything, because of course you have to build something to make money off it, right? To have that available. But if you build something outside the parameters of the agreement, that would give council a stopgap to,
Well, let's,
is that?
first of all, let Chuck answer the first
Sure.
question.
Yeah, and
then
that's maybe more for
maybe,
us. But that
Steve
first
or-
question, yeah, if it's more common to see that built into TIFs, and if other projects have done it in town, does that help?
I mean, with Kingland, it was an established, once you knew that it was started and it was put on, the assessment was there, and it was going to be a reoccurring amount every year, where we have people that, and that's one of the reasons that we flipped and went to this version versus having the city do it, was one, we knew it would likely get done for less money, just for save money. And number two, that we needed to react to one or two projects. And if the city was to be involved with it, we would lose this year and likely lose both of those projects. Because for you guys to go through your normal process, we absolutely could not do it in 20. That's not a knock on the city. It just can't, you can't go through your normal channels and have these things that would then be on the tax roll starting in 23. I'm sorry, what was your second question?
Well, just
Rama?
if it's increasingly frequent to see this kind of language in TIFs, right? Steve, didn't you say that other communities are doing it more?
It's my understanding from the plan.
And since this was just kind of a realization when I got my email back from Kelly today, I don't know that I've had enough time to, but again, we've worked, I think, very well collectively with Kelly and Justin and Steve getting to this point. So I don't want to act like we're not there. It's just this whole thing of, you would never enter into an agreement that said, Chuck, we're going to trust you to pay us over the next $2.5 million over the next however many years. You're just going to trust us. You would say, well, as a city, we can't do that, nor would I expect you to. We give you guys letters of credits for all kinds of things, which you should. I'm just saying, for me, just to have this come up today and go, and I don't know why a council wouldn't, but again, some of us have been around here a long time when we weren't going to build malls and we were never going to develop north of Bloomington Road. And there were folks that sat around the dais up there that said some of those very things. So for me, it's not crazy to have people sit there and say, Chuck, we don't want to give you any money this year. And because we know it runs out in a couple of years. And geez, that's unfortunate, but that's what you agreed to. And they would bring the document and say, did you sign this? It said you agree to it being appropriated every year. And it's $2.5 million. It's not an insignificant amount of money. So I'm trying to wrap my head around it more than I'm not trying to throw something up at the last minute here. It's just, I knew you would have to set up the zone, the urban revitalization zone, and go through all that stuff. And we'd verify. We're not trying to get any more out of it than we agreed to give them the bills and, what our actual costs were. But like I said, and I know I just emailed you this afternoon, this park is twice the size of the last one. And in 13 years, it hasn't paid off 1/3 of the TIF amount. To say that we're going to pay 3 times that amount off in 2/3 of the time is scary. I mean, it's, and we're at risk we're going to expend $5 million here because there are a bunch more costs, including the land, including the grading, including all the engineering. So we're going to have, it's not just the $2.6 million that's at risk for us. So yeah, But I don't want to think that we haven't worked very well collectively to get to this point. I mean, heck, Lori and I haven't even argued about corrugated steel or anything tonight.
That's because design is to be determined.
Right.
Council, you're probably noting that allowing a lot more leeway in terms of conversation because I think some things came to light late this afternoon. And so consequently, in the interest of trying to tease things out and not just get them prolonged or just get, in a spin cycle, I just thought it'd be good for this dialogue to occur so that we can hopefully move this thing forward. So I guess the question, the big question, Chuck, for you is that, are you uncomfortable or will not sign an agreement, just so council knows, if it includes the clause that TIF reimbursement is subject to annual appropriation by city council? Is that a deal breaker? And it's just a yes or no question. Or maybe.
And I don't, and with all due respect, Mayor, I don't know the answer to that tonight. I
Okay.
guess what I would propose is that we can, because I think unless you guys have other things that you want to discuss with staff or myself, that because I don't know what is the first meeting in April.
Maybe the 12th.
12th, that I guess I would like just a little bit of time to talk to legal counsel and see and talk to some of these other cities and stuff that I would like us to, I think we could still meet the April 12th meeting if we can get comfortable with it. It was just, again, not trying to stop this at the last minute. I'm not trying to renegotiate anything. I just want to have some certainty that we're going to get back the money that we had agreed to have coming back our direction. Otherwise, we've slogged through this thing. I think we're both comfortable with where it is. It's just because the reality of it is if we do this in 22, it'll start in 23, but nothing will really come on the tax rolls until the fall of 24 is the first possible. So I say, well, 2035, and then a whole bunch of things or several things need to happen. And that was my other thing, but I didn't maybe understand when we were talking about it is that I thought it just had to be started before 2035, that we had to have something that was on there that was paying. But again, I didn't know that at 2035 it stopped. And hopefully that won't be the case. Hopefully it'll be done a lot quicker than that. But think about what's changed since we started talking about this in January. We've got a little skirmish in Europe and we've got inflation that's going crazy like that, where things are up 20, 30, 40% sometimes. We think that the number, we've done some rough estimating and we've had engineers do it and I've talked to subcontractors. What makes it hard for us to define a number is we don't have any construction documents. So if you ask a guy, well, what's it cost to put in an 8-inch water main? Well, how deep is it? Sanitary sewer, we've got to extend it to the north. Well, how deep is it to run through our subdivision to get to where we can serve the ground north? We don't know yet. So it makes a big difference, as you found out in Prairie View, whether the sewer is 28 feet deep or 16 feet deep. That affects the cost a lot. The storm sewer, we haven't designed any of that yet, but we feel reasonably comfortable. We just want to be able to come back if it comes in, and you've seen engineers' estimates. We believe that they're okay, but we really want to find a way to move this forward. And
We're prepared to deal with that issue.
Yeah.
That's agreed to.
Yeah, no, I get it. It's just
No argument there.
none. And like I told Kelly, if we'd have done this 2 years ago, our pipe prices, we could count on a 2 or 3 or 4% increase. But now we get stuff and we're just like, we can't believe what some of the things cost these days. And we just want to not lock it in but we also said we're happy to share everything from bids to invoices. We're not trying to milk the thing. We just want to get reimbursed. So I guess my sentiment would be that I believe that we have agreement. We just got to see if we can get comfortable with that. And I think we can do that in the next few days so that we could hopefully be back here on April 12th with a signed agreement.
Oh, we were going to have an agreement first. We're going to get the concepts done and then do the agreement. How can we have a signed agreement? What if we don't agree?
I thought
Council's gonna-
I thought we agreed on I thought we could move it forward subject to, I mean, I don't want to wait to
What
have
I hear you
start.
saying, there's two things we don't agree on. I think it's the non-appropriation clause right now, and well, I don't know, and the duration of time. All right. Usually we put a number. That's either that number, which will be flexible, right? Whatever we won't be flexible. We'll have to agree on it, basically.
Yep.
And then we'll say you get that amount of TIF up to that number or X number of years, whichever comes first. That's been our success.
Is that by state?
That's by our negotiation, or whatever our model,
By what?
by our own model.
So we
Tiff,
have
you
to,
can take it.
there's a little bit of both. So we have to put a dollar amount in the urban renewal plan. And then there's a duration at the same time when you adopt a TIF ordinance.
Yeah.
But
What if,
you could go up to 20 years, but again, I don't think that's what we want to be the exception.
What-
I do think if you change that, I'm a little nervous if you, I don't want to put Chuck in a bad position on this one, but I am nervous if you change the non-appropriation clause. Chuck may come back with us in 3 weeks, or somebody will come back on the Lincoln Way project and say they're nervous they can't get paid. That rebate is going to be a big rebate. That's going to have a non-appropriation clause in it. You know what I mean? So you're going to have a policy if you start waiving that. Is it going to be for all projects or just this project? Not requiring it. You have to think hard on that for other rebates.
if the duration cap isn't there, is the appropriation clause as scary? Because, you're thinking that a future council might, as you're getting close to the end of your duration, might say like, no, we're not going to pay back anymore. But if the duration cap's not there, then you'd eventually get money back.
Well, I think we're starting to get into some of the details that maybe staff should be.
That's fine.
I'm less concerned, if I may answer Bronwyn's, I'm less concerned about the duration than I am because I believe with the things that we're starting that we don't have agreements for because we can't enter into an agreements because we don't have an agreement with, that I'm less concerned about the duration than I am of somebody 5 years from now going, we think $1 million is enough for Chuck. We don't need to give Chuck back any more money, and we don't have to because he said it's okay if we don't. So the deal must have worked. I could see future people setting up here saying, it must have worked. If Chuck knew he wasn't going to get this money back, it must have been okay because he knew that there's a chance he wouldn't get it back. But I just got to, again, this has all come up in the last 6 hours, and I just need to research it a little bit. I thought that once we had a developer's agreement, that even though, because sometimes, again, in the past, you guys have had things that you have to procedurally go through every year, the abatements, those type of things that the assessor or whoever comes in and says, yep, you guys have to ratify this or whatever the right term is for that every year. But it wasn't a matter that they could say, no, we're not going to give that anymore. And that's, as I understand, that's what this says, is that you could say, we've collected that money, but we don't want to rebate it to the developer.
Any other comments you want to make?
Thank you.
Thank you. Do you have something you want to say? Okay.
Thanks for letting us have a little more leeway. I think it's helpful. So in these negotiations.
I'm sorry. Does anybody else wants to address council before we close public input? Then we'll go to the conversation. We'll close public input. Go ahead, Tim.
What we've asked the other side, the developer, to do is to take on certain risks.
No, we didn't ask them. Let me clarify. We did not ask them to take on a risk. They've chosen that option. I want to emphasize again, we could flip it back the way we are.
I apologize. I wasn't meaning the upfront cost. I mean the issue of the annual council approval.
They don't need that if they go to the other scenario.
Correct. But if we go this direction and we have it subject to council approval, we're asking the developer to absorb risk. And what they should be doing, I would think, is saying, look, we're going to have to give something else is going to have to change to offset the risk that they're taking on. And so I would like to better understand from Dwayne's perspective, what it is that we're gaining in terms of our financing. We're benefiting, and I'm willing to spot Dwayne, super smart guy, that we're benefiting in some way with respect to our bond rating. But on the other side, what we're losing is the certainty that we can provide to the developer that they're going to receive this money. And I share Chuck's concern. I want to believe that future councils will be faithful to this, but if it's not binding, then that inserts an element of risk. I don't think it's fair to the developer to do that.
Has a council in Ames history ever taken away a TIF after they've given it?
But it's a little bit unfair.
Tiff Rebate.
We just don't have,
We don't have a lot of
Oh, wait,
history.
she asked a question. Does anyone, do you know that?
We don't have a long history of rebates, so, but the ones we do have, we have
I've never done it. Yeah.
Thank you.
I mean, it's a fair question if there was all these examples, but we just don't have that. So, and there's also the aspect of just sort of fair dealing, that we want to treat developers fairly. We're asking to take this risk on. So I need to understand what Dwayne says is this benefit that we're getting if we're going to insert this uncertainty.
I can tell you it's debt. It's debt.
And
But how much? Is it just
$2 million,
2.3?
2.1 million.
But that's
Pennies.
that's
Pennies, right?
a small amount.
Is this your new policy though? That's what I'm talking about, a broader policy. There is going to be one before you that's going to be 30 million or 40 million, let's say, rebate.
Well, so that's challenging.
Pennies?
We're
Is that real dollars?
So I think it's fair to ask about the policy. It just seems hard to think through that in the context of this particular transaction. $2 million is not a lot of money in our size of government. So that's not going to change the score. I think it's fair for you to ask what our policy is as we approach the link. I'm not prepared here tonight to offer comment on that without Dwayne's input on that.
This won't be the last rebate we'll do, so that's why I think you need to have a policy.
So I agree with that. But I just think that's, in this context, and we're also doing this, I feel badly that you guys have all worked so hard to get to this point, and now we're sort of inserting this.
No, Chuck and I like to get together, so.
Can you set different policies though for different amounts?
Sure, that's a policy.
Yeah.
Well, and it seems to me that with Kingland, you built the building, it was there, boom, you took off. This is a progressive development, right?
Yeah.
So you're going to have 13 or 14 lots. You might have 2 or 3 buildings, get to a certain valuation, and all of a sudden we have something happens that it slows down, for example. I mean, so back to your point about, a policy, is there a policy for one, hopefully the link, if you got phase 1, phase 2, also phases, you build it and you got to assess valuation, minimum assessment, and you can go ahead like you did with Kingland, right?
I can just have kind of to give you the question, who does this? Annually, the state publishes a report about TIF across the state because we have to submit a report to the state now, and they catalog it. So I think in the management report that I saw from 2020, about 43% of the value of TIF is in one of these non-appropriating categories. So 57% is counted as debt, and about 43% of the value, based on these state calculations, uses this non-appropriation clause.
So it's not uncommon.
It's common across the state.
Probably
But
increased.
that's about the extent I can tell you about it, because
But
we have
those
such
include the
a,
old ones too, not the recently. Those are.
that's all debt
Yeah.
across the state.
Like I said, I think if you go back to 2010.
They're increasingly common.
And if the city's doing the project, that's automatically being the debt side. You can't not
Sure.
appropriate yourself. So
Right.
it's that's the best I think I can give you as context. And as Steve said, I think we've done it twice in the last 7 years as a developer rebate.
So what I heard was that for whatever reason, it all of a sudden dawned on Chuck, or it all of a sudden saw that there was a more risk today that he wasn't aware of. And I think that he was trying to be open and honest about that. And he didn't say no, but didn't say yes. He just needs to talk to an attorney to have some time to process that. So the question becomes, is this council committed to want to try to make this project go? Do you want to allow some more time, table, this item? Do you want to go ahead and direct staff to continue negotiations? I think there's actually 3 points. There's 2 are, one's a TIF reimbursement, one's a particular use of the site, and then the other one is on, the length of time for TIF and the amount for TIF. I mean, these are what he's identified in an email, to council late this afternoon. So I guess the question is, apparently we're out of lots. So is there something that we want to continue pursuing after? And we'd like to get some kind of motion here that how you would like to proceed in terms of absent even going through and talking about, I think we have to talk about a policy on rebates too, on TIF, how TIF's going to be used. Maybe that's not appropriate for this particular item tonight, but I think we got to look at that in light of the fact that we have another project or projects coming up that I think staff needs some guidance on in terms of what we're going to be doing. What council wants to do to try and avoid hashing through these details in the council meeting, essentially.
Well, so what relationship does that lack of policy have to whether we have staff continue the discussions or we put this on an April 12th agenda? Because it seems to me if we need a policy, then we should have the policy before we continue the discussions and put it on the agenda. If we don't think we need the policy for this one, that in itself seems to be a policy. And then other things can move forward.
Well, I heard Steve say there's 2 options. One, you can go with the rebate model, or you can go flip back to what we've done traditionally as well too. Instead of having a rebate, is basically the city fronts the.
I'm sure the developer doesn't want to wait till we develop a policy on this one. So what if we just delay it a few weeks? April, I would move that we table this until, what is it, April 12th?
Mm-hmm. Is there a second?
Second.
Discussion?
I don't know how important this is timing wise. I mean, Chuck seemed to have not as much concern. Is timing of the essence here, or I mean, that's sort of material if we're going to delay this.
Enough time, too much time.
Well, I mean, don't know, can it come back in the form of an agreement on April 12th? I guess is what I'm saying. Or do we have to come back and have a discussion to put it on a later meeting? We are working with some people that are doing like certificates of need with the state of Iowa that we have to have some of these things for that. And I'm not going to need 3 weeks to research this. I'd like to see that report that Kelly talked about, Yep. I just don't know. I'd like to talk to some of the people that have been subject to this.
Yeah.
I just wasn't aware. I'm not saying they didn't tell me. I just wasn't aware that it was a deal where the city, I thought when we had a developers agreement, it meant that we had an agreement that this was going to happen. And I think in a couple of days, I can wrap my head around it. And either we can come back on the 12th with hopefully a signed agreement, because we need to keep the zoning and the preliminary plat and all of those things working through your system to make this feasible. I mean, we just got rid of the snow, but we're really kind of thinking about what it's going to take and contractors and all of that stuff to have something so we can have these projects started in 2022. Thank you.
Thanks. Steve and Kelly, we have a workshop on the 5th. I do not want to put anything on workshop agenda that's going to take more than a few minutes, because it's going to be a long.
It depends what they agree to then. I mean, I think that's it. Like the way I'm seeing this is if Chuck can review the stuff and he's like, yeah, okay, all right, I'll do the agreement. Then yes, like, okay, then we could proceed and, we could say contingent on acceptance of that clause. I'm fine with that. And that would be the quickest thing. But if he thinks about it and says, oh, no, I'm really not okay with that, then we do have to discuss it more.
Yeah.
So,
Or we could just approve it tonight without the being subject to council approval.
I'm not comfortable doing that.
Could we just do alternative 2, which is directing staff to attempt to negotiate modified terms and bring it
If
back
necessary.
for
Not-
final approval in April?
Not
What are
really
the
a modified term.
terms, though? Our term is to
Yeah.
have the non-appropriation clause.
Well, or if the developer decides he's interested in flipping it and waiting a year, which is not preferable.
I should withdraw my motion to table it until the 12th.
I think that, yeah, because tabling would mean there's no action until the 12th
Right.
whatsoever.
What if,
It's tabled.
So I want to make sure we're on the same page. This is not a zero-sum game. So if we take away the certainty of these payments being made, then they're going to have to offset something, and it's going to be a less favorable deal for the city. So it's too big of an amount of money for them to not have to rebalance on their side. So this is not going to be the same deal coming back to us. We can't just make the deal much less favorable and expect them to be okay with it. So I think we should go forward with it as is. I'm going to just go ahead and make this motion because I'd like to have council members commit on this. I would move alternative 1 and make the agreement not subject to council approval. Is that?
Appropriation.
I'm sorry.
Annual appropriation.
Annual appropriation.
Yes, and make it not subject to annual appropriation. And this is not part of the motion, but then with the understanding that we're going to come back and really develop a policy. I think what you said is fair. I agree with you to do that. But this is $2.3 million, guys. We should do this and move this thing forward.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Discussion.
$2.3 million is a lot of money, especially when we look at how much we nitpick about small amounts going to human services and other things. So to me, this is a big issue.
But if it's a big issue for you, it's a big issue for them.
I know that.
Sure.
I agree.
But-
And I think
But why
that,
would we create this uncertainty that they wouldn't get paid? I agree with you. I think 2.3 is a lot of money. They're fronting the costs.
Amber, go ahead.
No, I mean, I think it's not an unreasonable request for the developer to ask for certainty in their negotiations with us.
I would say, I mean, it's, from what I've heard about it being an increasingly accepted practice, and, based on the advice of Dwayne and how it impacts our financials, I don't think it's unreasonable. I guess. I mean, I think that we've done it before, so it's not like we don't have precedent, and it's a increasingly common thing in the state. So I think that it won't be as disastrous a risk as it's feared.
And isn't there also the option to split this if the developer doesn't want to take all the risk at this time? There could be multiple projects. It could be 2 projects instead of 1.
That's alternative 3.
That's
That would be
alternative 3.
kind of cease negotiations and right now let the developer do whatever they want to do this year and then probably restart them in the fall and look at a different scale of project.
For
I'm-
second phase.
Yeah.
Second phase.
And
I'm
that-
only
maybe that
asking
comes
because maybe the smaller dollar amount makes it, feel less risky to the developer. I'm just asking the question.
At this time, the developer prefers to do the whole project,
Okay.
obviously with the terms that are in the agreement, subject to the non-appropriation clause. But if we're not comfortable with that, then maybe we want to look at a smaller project.
Okay, so, and the motion essentially has to do with the city TIF obligation. Item E is being struck, which is TIF reimbursement is subject to annual appropriation by city council, correct?
That's correct.
And so there's nothing included in the motion regarding the time limit until 2035. I'm just saying that's what the motion is on the floor right now, so.
Sure. And if I could just confirm with Chuck, when you were up here speaking.
No, now we're talking about council, so that's the motion though. I heard that there was some,
That's the motion. But I didn't hear Chuck saying that was as big of an issue as the appropriation.
okay, all right, so then, okay. Everyone understand the motion?
If I could, one more thing to Bron's point. I think you make a good point, Bron, there are different models of doing this. If we want to use a different model where we don't commit to making these appropriations, that's fine. We should do that. But then we're going to expect a different agreement in place because the developer has to offset that risk. So here we're asking them to go forward without the certainty of the payments being received, but yet without any kind of way of protecting themselves. And that's what we can't do.
Okay, roll call, please.
Mayor, could I just ask a question quickly? This is, if this motion fails and staff goes back to negotiate, and it turns out that somehow they decide after the negotiations, maybe Steve finds out more from Dwayne or whatever, that we are going to not need that non-appropriations clause, are we putting ourselves in a position where the winning side on this motion, which would be the voting it down, has to then make the motion which we're voting on now? Does that make sense?
In order to reconsider the motion, I mean.
I didn't understand.
It's one of those cases where can we entertain that same motion
We could.
again to reconsider it if we have the advice
We have new.
that it's a thing to do?
In the future, you're saying?
Yes.
You just vote it down. Can you come back and do it? If we recommend after Chuck?
Yeah, one of us.
I
could,
think
yeah.
that-
We should
Yeah,
drop
so-
it.
My understanding is that you'd have to do is the winning, the party that won the motion would have to make a motion to reconsider and then have to go through a roll call vote to reconsider that motion. And then you'd basically start all over again, is my understanding.
Okay, thank you.
Roll call, please.
Aye.
Nay.
Aye.
Nay.
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 Okay.
So then we have the option for staff to continue the negotiations. So
It's really just alternative. one.
alternative 2, is that right?
Yes, I'll-
Isn't it just alternative
Alternative
one
one.
without the striking part E?
Oh, so finalizing, I
Yeah.
guess, was what I was not sure about, but I suppose it is
Wait, let
optional.
me make it clear. I don't think you want one. That means you don't want us to talk anymore. That's the deal on our side. That's the
Oh.
only deal. Is that what you're saying?
Well,
Or do you want us to go back and talk?
I
Well, one
want you
would,
to go back and talk.
Well, here's the deal. Alternative 1 says if the city council believes the final terms proposed by the developer,
We're satisfied.
and to me, what's come to light through the public input is the terms are no longer
That's true.
acceptable to the developer. He is taking objection to what is included in the staff report. So I think you have to have a different motion. You can't do alternative 1, but you can make a motion, but you just can't alternative 1. If you're asking them to go back and continue negotiating or working with the developer, that would be a motion. Just, there's no alternative for it, my understanding.
So we can move to have staff go back and continue negotiations with the developer on this project. Would
Yeah.
that be?
Yep.
Second.
Okay. Hey, everyone understand the motion? All right, let's do a roll call again.
Aye.
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 All right, very good. Anything else tonight, Kelly, on this one?
nope.
Okay. Thank you. All right, moving on to item 28, resolution approving 2022-2023 proposed annual action plan for CDBG and home projects or programs, excuse me. Vanessa?
Good evening.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Hello.
Oh, it's that time of year. We're a little bit behind schedule, but it's time for us to talk about our 22-23 proposed annual action plan projects. And typically, what we try to do is normally this action plan is due every May. And this is the actual final year of our 5-year plan that we're working on. And although the president has signed the appropriations bill, they still have not appropriated our allocations for a CDBG or home. But if we don't get started, we're going to be behind. So what we're proposing to do tonight is to go over some priorities that staff is recommending for council's consideration. And then we would take those ideas and get also ideas from the public as how they're perceiving we should use our last year's worth of this 5-year cycle. Also, it doesn't mean that you're stuck with whatever you come up with tonight. I mean, if we get some input that you would want to consider from the public, that can also be part of anything that we would add or subtract from the proposed actions that we have tonight. What we're wanting to propose in front of you is 4 projects. One is to utilize our CDBG funds to provide down payment and closing cost assistance to eligible first-time home buyers in the Baker subdivision. Secondly, is to use the funds to provide some type of rehabilitation assistance for single-family homeowners. Thirdly, would be used home funds to provide gap financing for the construction of low-income tax credit units in the Baker subdivision. And 4 would be to utilize CDBG funds to acquire and demolish a deteriorated residential or commercial property citywide and then sell for redevelopment. And under this particular proposal, we do not have to use, it doesn't have to be affordable housing benefit. We can use 30% of our funds for non-affordable housing items. And so we feel that those criteria meets the goals and priorities that we established in the 2019-23 consolidated plan. And like I said earlier, even though we don't have our annual appropriation, what we did is we projected using our current year allocation of both home and CDBG. So what happens when we go set the budgets on these items, if the appropriations comes in higher, we would adjust accordingly. If they come in lower, we would adjust accordingly, if you would agree with those. So I quickly would like to go over attachment number 2 of your report so you get some sense of what our proposals are. Again, as we talked about back in March, as we talked about where we were with our home money and allocations and what ideas we might be utilizing with our home instead with our low-income tax credit application status, we will be bringing some information to you from that discussion from March 8th on April 12th, because we have been working with the developer and we have an idea to bring back to you. But kind of in that vein, we were proposing to not use our home money for down payment and closing cost assistance, but instead use our CDBG funds. So then we could use the home funds to provide that gap financing that we talked about back in March 8th as an option for using this coming year's funds and any of our rollover home funds. Also, we have one more improvement we want to do in the Baker subdivision. That's to do that Park at Park on the Y lot that's right on Latimer Lane. So we have been working with Parks and Recs and kind of have an idea of what that park would look like. Again, not something big, but just something that the neighbors in the very vicinity of that circle can utilize rather than having to go all the way over to Franklin Park, but which still would be an option. Also, and continue to remove our slum and blight program. We're in the midst of also have been working with inspections department and again, trying to get rid of some of those dangerous buildings that are still out there that's kind of been a hazard to the neighborhood. So I've continued to set aside some money for that. And then also to a possible start a home improvements program for single family homeowners. Don't know if that would be a loan or a grant, or we would start off doing big projects, but we'll kind of gain what the interest is and what we could do in creating that program. And so that is the budget set before you based on this year's allocation and our rollover from each one of those programs. And in particular, I want to just talk quickly about CARES. We have about $150-some thousand left in our CARES round 1 and 3. And we've kind of really slowed down on the rent, mortgage, and utility program. And so it was an idea to kind of look at switching some of those funds, about $85,000 of those funds, to help. We begin a lot of calls about people with mental distress during the pandemic, needing help with maybe transportation, gas vouchers to get from appointments, are maybe needing help. Now they're on more medication than before and be gap. So we would be working with those mental health agencies to see what types of services that we could provide to help and tie it back to the pandemic, like we would be required to. But they've had a lot of people, being distressed over the pandemic. And so I thought this might be a good opportunity to address those needs as well, if you're in agreement with that. So with that, I'll just open it up for any questions that you may have.
Questions?
Vanessa, do you have anything in mind that you would change if our allocation was lower or higher than what we had this past year?
I have had a lot of requests to try to bring back the deposit and first month's rent program. And so possibility of doing that, but also have to realize that that's 8 or 7 projects we'd be trying to do. But, just to see, one of the goals I have when we go out for public comments is to really find out what is being offered in the community already. Because one of the things we try not to do is duplicate what other human services are already doing. We kind of like to do something that they're not doing or fill the gap, because it doesn't work well for us when you have 5 or 3 agencies all doing the same thing. So we'd have to see that. And then, of course, we could add more money to the home improvement program, or even to the down payment, as we see how those prices and may need for down payment as well. And of course, if we get more home money, we could again fund that project that we're looking at, trying to find the gap for, and may end up having to use less of our ARP money. So we'll see. But lately, that home money has been going down, so just don't know. I heard that everything was being increased, but until we actually see the allocations, I don't have any idea what that would look like. Did I answer your question?
Thank you. You
Probably
did.
had them some more, didn't I?
Other questions? All right, I'd entertain a motion on resolution approving 2022-2023 proposed annual action plan projects for community development block grant, Cdbg, and home programs.
Move approval?
Second.
Thank you. Roll call.
Aye.
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 Thank you.
Thank you.
Any update on the multifamily, or still working on that one, or?
Actually, we'll be bringing you something on April 12th.
Oh,
Great.
boy.
Thank you. All right, you can move on to item number 29, hearing a proposal to sell subject to easement, city-owned land locally owned, known as 1101 Aviation Way, which is home for Sigler. Any questions for staff on this item? Declare the public hearing on this item to be open. Is there anyone who wants to address council on this particular item? Hearing none, I'll declare the public hearing to be closed and entertain a motion on resolution approving sale of 1101 Aviation Way to Mulmac LLC.
Move approval?
Second.
Thank you. Roll call.
Aye.
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 Aye. Aye.
Thank you. Moving on to item number 30, public hearing and proposal to vacate existing public utility easement and water main easement at 1915 Philadelphia Street. Any questions for staff? All right, declare the public hearing on this item to be open. Is there anyone who wants to address council on this item? Seeing none, declare the public hearing to be closed. Entertain a motion on a resolution approving vacating public utility easement and water main easement at 1915 Philadelphia Street.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. Roll call.
Aye.
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 Thank you. Next is item 31, hearing on side ride electric bus system upgrades. I see Barb is in the audience. Any questions for Barb on this item? I declare the public hearing on side ride electric bus system upgrades to be open. Does anyone wants to address council on this item? Seeing none, declare the public hearing to be closed. Entertain a motion accepting reported bids and delaying award of contract.
So moved.
Second.
Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carried. Item 32, hearing on the 2021-2022 arterial street pavement improvements, North Dakota Avenue and Ontario Street. Any questions for staff? Declare the public hearing on this item to be open. Anyone want to address council? Hearing none, declare the public hearing to be closed. Entertain a motion on resolution approving final plan specifications and awarding the contract to Construct Inc. of Ames, Iowa, in the amount of $1,430,118.60, contingent upon receipt of Iowa Department of Transportation concurrence.
So moved. Second.
Thank you. Roll call.
Aye.
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 And item 33, any questions for staff on the 2021-2022 Collector Street pavement improvements on Hoover Avenue? Declare that public hearing to be open. Does anyone want to address council on this item? Seeing none, I declare the public hearing to be closed. Entertain a motion on resolution approving final plan specifications and awarding the contract to Manats Inc. of Ames, Iowa, in the amount of $2,185,487.58.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. Roll call.
Aye.
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 Thank you. Moving on to the ordinances. Entertain a motion on third passage and adoption of ordinance number 4459, rezoning 525 Southeast 16th Street from agricultural A to highway oriental commercial HOC and retain the environmentally sensitive area overlay OE for the floodway.
Move on third.
Second.
Thank you. Roll call.
Aye.
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 Item 35, entertain motion on third passage and adoption of ordinance number 4460, rezoning 2098 West 190th from floating suburban residential medium density FSRM to floating suburban residential medium density planned unit development FSRM PUD overlay.
Move on third.
Second.
Thank you. Roll call.
Aye.
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 Thank you. Entertain a motion on third passage and adoption of ordinance number 4461 to allow temporary yard waste processing facilities through approval of a special use permit by the Zoning Board of Adjustment.
Move on third.
Second.
Thank you. Roll call.
Aye.
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 Thank you. Moving on to disposition of communications to council. We have 3 items. The first is a letter from Lee Grassley, Senior Manager of MediaCom. Council, this is just I think a prerequisite required notice of programming changes and rate adjustments. So just take it under advisement. Second item is a memo from Brian Phillips regarding code of conduct for public meetings. Any questions for Brian? Otherwise, I entertain a motion to put on. Do we just adopt this?
No, you can't adopt it. If you
That's
want us
right.
to proceed with it, we have to put on a future
Thank you.
agenda for you to adopt.
Thank you. Is there a motion?
Move we put this on a future agenda.
Second.
Okay. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carried. And third is a letter that I received, and maybe you all received, just from Kevin Burke, President of and CEO of Ames Convention and Visitor Bureau, with a positive 2021 Cdbg annual report. So just passing this on for your review, and just note that they do express appreciation for the grant assistance that we offered, and it's just encouraging to see there's some positive movement in the Convention and Visitor Bureau. So, all right, with that, I will go ahead and move on to council comments. Gloria.
Since we have now approved a naming policy, I would like to move that we get a memo regarding what it would take to rename the airport and looking into the FAA requirements, costs associated with it, et cetera.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carried. Anything else?
Nope, that's it.
Thank you. Tim?
Well, it's March,
Mhm.
and I want to congratulate the Ames High boys basketball team for winning the state tournament. That's pretty cool. I don't know if there's an opportunity to have them come in and high five them, but that's pretty amazing accomplishment. And then I don't know who, I didn't catch the score. Did Iowa State win the men's and women's games last Friday? Did we win those? So pretty exciting. So congratulations to Iowa State men and women teams to make the Sweet 16. We'll cheer them on Friday. That's all. Thanks.
Thank you. Anita?
Just that as part of that employee newsletter, I saw that the DEI group is reading Ouch, That Stereotype Hurts and Religious Diversity and Inclusion. And I just wanted to acknowledge their work related to diversity. So that's it.
Thank you. Amber?
If you're interested in more of the Ames Convention and Visitors Bureau updates, the annual meeting is next Tuesday, 4:30 to 6:30 p.m. at Ryman Gardens.
Thank you.
Nothing for me, thanks.
Trevor?
Yes, just a few things. So I just sent out the first draft of the agenda for next week's meeting. So please look that over and let me know if you want any topics changed or added. They're currently in the process of finding my replacement. So working on when that meeting will be to get them in for the first time. And then I'm sure everyone saw, but the student body president and vice president were elected, and that was Jacob Ludwig and Jaden Allright. So that is all.
All right. Very good. Just if council is wondering if I have any spare time, the answer is no right now. The legislature is hot at it, and I don't think I'm going to go into all the bills that we are dealing with that are going to potentially affect our community. But as they develop, I may be sending out some information to you, asking you to reach out. But there's a lot going on, and there's a lot of balls in the air, and it's just been, it's that time of, as Tim said, it's that time of year, only it's legislature's in session. So anyway, but I will say this, that Herman Kornbach and several other of our representatives have been, proactive. They do reach out, and so we're in contact with them. With that, I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
Is there a second? All right. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All right. We are adjourned. Thank you.